The swift, savage sinking of the USS Indianapolis. On July 30th, 1945, after extensive service during World War II, the United States Navy heavy cruiser Indianapolis was torpedoed by an Imperial Japanese submarine, then sank in just 12 minutes. Of the 1,195 crewmen aboard, about 300 were swallowed up by the Pacific Ocean, while the remaining 890 faced exposure, dehydration, saltwater poisoning and shark attacks while stranded in the open sea, with only a few lifeboats and almost no food or water. Today, let's get into the story of how this mid-century floating war tank ended up becoming shark bait after a top-secret, high-speed delivery trip by exploring the swift and savage sinking of the USS Indianapolis. Launched in 1931, the USS Indianapolis was one of two Portland-class heavy cruisers of the United States Navy, named for the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, the hometown of her captain of 8 years, Admiral Raymond Spruance. The ship was among the third class of treaty cruisers constructed by the US Navy following the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, signed by all major powers of the First World War, which was meant to prevent an arms race by limiting naval activity among the signees. Originally designated as a light armoured cruiser, Indianapolis was later reclassified as a heavy cruiser because of her 9.8-inch 55 caliber Mark IX guns installed in no less than 3 triple mounts, along with 85-inch 25 caliber guns and 2 QF 3-pounder Hotchkiss guns for aircraft defence. Phew, don't sneak up on her at night. She was a bit underweight for a Portland cruiser, though clocking in at a mere 10.1 tons rather than the standard full load displacement of 12.7 tons. But she came equipped with 2 distinctive raked funnels, a tripod foremast, as well as a small tower and polemast. The ship measured 186 metres or 610 feet and 3 inches, and had 4 propeller shafts, 4 geared turbines and 8 boilers, which meant she could get up to speeds of 32.7 knots, which translates to 60.6 kilometers per hour or 37.6 miles per hour. Portland-class cruisers were outfitted as fleet flagships, with space for a flag officer and his staff, as well as 2 aircraft catapults amidship. The crew size for these kind of cruisers varied, with a regular design complement of 807 and a wartime complement of 952 members, which could increase to as much as 1,229 for fleet flagships like the Indianapolis. She was constructed by the New York Shipbuilding Corporation and launched on November 7, 1931, as the second ship named for the city of Indianapolis, following a cargo vessel of the same name dubbed in 1918. She was sponsored by Lucy Taggart, the daughter of former mayor of Indianapolis, Thomas Taggart. The Indianapolis would spend much of the interwar years training in the Atlantic, Guantanamo Bay, and off the Chilean coast. But she would sail to Maine to embark for her most famous passenger, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, at Campobello Island, New Brunswick, arriving on July 3, 1933. Along with the President, she hosted 6 members of the cabinet during her 24-hour stay there, disembarking Roosevelt and departing for the Philadelphia Navy Yard on July 4th. After inspections that September, Indianapolis then toured the Canal Zone, Hawaii, and made it to San Pedro and San Diego. By November 1933, she officially became the flagship of Scouting Fleet 1 and would embark President Roosevelt twice more while training with the Scouting Force and touring most of Latin America. In December 1941, however, Indianapolis led a mock bombardment on a remote Hawaiian island that quickly became the real thing when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into World War II. She was quickly absorbed into Task Force 12, which searched for Japanese aircraft carriers, reinforced a surprise attack by US Air Forces in New Guinea, and stormed the Japanese staging area on Kiska Island, Alaska, sinking enemy ships and repelling bombs. She remained in the Alaskan Aleutian Islands, and by January 1943, supporting the landings and leading patrols as she searched for Japanese vessels trying to reinforce Kiska. She intercepted the 3,150-ton enemy cargo ship, Akagni Maru, fully laden with troops, munitions, and supplies, ripe for the picking. The cargo ship tried to reply to the audio challenge, but was completely shelled by Indianapolis and her massive guns and exploded. Through mid-1943, Indianapolis stayed near the Aleutian Island, escorting American convoys and providing shore bombardments which allowed the Allied powers to finally capture Attu, riding the archipelago of the Japanese. The ship next moved to Hawaii, where she was claimed as the flagship of proud Indianapolis native Vice Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, remember him? And was sailing from Pearl Harbor by November 1943 as part of the invasion of the Gilbert Islands, which marked the halfway point between New Guinea and Hawaii. She landed on the 19th, where her guns proved the difference in the battles of Macon and Tarawa, and the conquest of the Marshall Islands, as she acted as support for landings, shot down enemy planes, and shelled enemy strongpoints as landing parties fought Japanese defenders. She bombarded Kwajalein at the end of January 1944, shelling and suppressing 2 enemy shore batteries before utterly destroying a blockhouse while supporting advancing troops with a creeping barrage, where the ship moved slow enough to keep pace with the infantry. The Indianapolis shot down a torpedo bomber on March 31st during attack on Western Carolines as Allied forces moved through the Palau Islands. By June, she was leading the assault on the Mariana Islands on the 19th in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. On that day, the US Navy destroyed a reported 426 Japanese planes, while losing only 29. Indianapolis shot down 1 torpedo plane during what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, that basically wiped out the Japanese air opposition on the front. The vessel operated in the Marianas for the next few weeks, helping to retake Guam and becoming the first ship to enter Apra Harbor since early in the war. She saw more action in the Battle of Peleliu that September, then sailed to Manus Island just north of New Guinea, where she operated for 10 days before returning to the Mar Island Naval Shipyard in California for refitting. Thereafter, Indianapolis rejoined the action by entering the task force that launched an attack on Tokyo to cover the landings on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. The mission was to destroy Japanese air facilities, and the fleet achieved complete tactical surprise by approaching the island coastline under the cover of inclement weather. The attacks were pressed for more than 48 hours, with the US Navy losing only 49 carrier planes while claiming 499 enemy planes, an eye-watering 10-to-1 kill-loss ratio. Immediately after the strikes, the task force raced to the Bonin Islands in continuation of its support of the landings on Iwo Jima. The ship remained there until March to protect the invasion fleet. The Indianapolis would strike Tokyo again on February 25th as part of the American force that blew up 158 planes and sank 5 small ships, while pounding ground installations to dust and destroying train lines again, in the very extreme Japanese winter. The ship next moved on to assist in the invasion of Okinawa in March, where she spent 7 whole days pouring 8-inch shells into the beach defences. During this offensive, enemy aircraft repeatedly attacked the American ships, but Indianapolis shot down 6 of these planes and damaged 2 others. However, by the end of that month, her lookouts spotted a Japanese fighter plane as it emerged from the morning air and began to dive vertically. Naturally, her guns opened fire, but within just 15 seconds, the plane was already overhead. Although tracers converged on it, causing it to swerve, the pilot managed to release his bomb from a height of 7.6 meters or 25 feet, then crashed his plane into the sea near the port stern. The bomb plummeted through the deck, into the crew's mess hall, down through the berthing compartment and through the fuel tanks before crashing through the keel and exploding in the water underneath. 9 crew members died, but her bulkheads prevented any progressive flooding, and Indianapolis was able to steam under her own power to a salvage ship for emergency repairs, back to Mare Island for more intensive maintenance. After a complete overhaul, Indianapolis received orders to undertake a top-secret mission, transporting a critical shipment of material for the first atomic bomb to Tinian Island in the Philippines. She was loaded up with the complete non-nuclear parts for a little boy-type atomic bomb and several hundred pounds of scientific instruments. Also on board was the bomb's enriched uranium projectile in the form of 38.5 kilogram or 85-pound discs, which were kept inside a lead-lined steel container that was bolted and chained to the floor of the captain's quarters for maximum security. Some of the scientists from the Manhattan Project that created Little Boy also travelled with the crew, incognito of course, to monitor the uranium's radioactivity. Indianapolis departed San Francisco Hunters Point Naval Shipyard on July 16, 1945, within hours of the Trinity test in New Mexico. This was the first detonation of a nuclear weapon conducted by the United States Army at 5:29 a.m. that very morning. She arrived in Pearl Harbor on the 19th after setting a record of 74.5 hours as she sailed at an average speed of 29 knots, which breaks down to 50 kilometers per hour or 33 miles per hour. Seems like those propellers and turbines were now back up to par. She would deliver the atomic bomb components to Tinian on July 26th, where she waited for the remaining 25.6 kilograms or 56 pounds of enriched uranium used for the target piece of the bomb, which had been divided into 3 sections and sent on 3 different cargo planes which were already on their way from that New Mexico test. Within days, all the pieces were in place and the assembly of the Little Boy atomic bomb commenced. The weapon, which would be dropped on Hiroshima on the morning of August 6th, was inscribed with autographs and graffiti from the crewmen who loaded the bomb into the plane. One reads, "Greetings to the Emperor from the men of the Indianapolis." With her mission completed, Indianapolis set sail for Guam, where she completed tours and then left for Okinawa, by way of Leyte in the Philippines, to join the task force operating in the East China Sea. But just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, Indianapolis was struck on her starboard side by a pair of torpedoes launched from a Japanese submarine. The damage was catastrophic to say the least, as the ship had only beefed up its already impressive armament throughout the war, and thus had become extremely top-heavy. In just 12 minutes, she capsized with her stern rising in the air as she was swallowed up by the ocean. 300 of the 1,195 crew members drowned, and with only a few lifeboats and no life jackets available, the remaining 890 men were now set adrift in the open ocean. Apparently, the US Navy Command had no idea of the sinking until 4.5 days later, when the survivors were spotted in the water by a routine patrol flight. The pilots dropped a life raft and radio transmitter, which allowed all air and surface units capable of rescue operations to be dispatched to the scene at once. And guys, what they came across was beyond horrifying. Many of the crewmen, who were all aged between 18 and 21 by the way, were severely injured from the explosions, and all suffered from a lack of food and water, which led to dehydration and hyperthermia, or an increased concentration of salt in the blood. Some of the men managed to find rations in the form of spam and crackers among the ship's debris, but prolonged exposure to the blazing sun by day and freezing nighttime temperatures led to widespread hyperthermia, as well as severe desquamation or skin peeling, yuck, due to continued exposure to salt water and bunker oil. As the hours ticked by, many of the men fell into varying states of delirium. Some even suffered hallucinations, and many had committed suicide in the intervening days at sea. Then there were the sharks. Hundreds of these predators were drawn to the wreckage, and after picking off the dead and wounded, they turned on the helpless survivors, consuming anywhere from 12 to 150 of the already hopeless and defenseless crewmen. A 2007 episode of Shark Week, which aired on the Discovery Channel, claimed that the sinking of the Indianapolis resulted in the most shark attacks on humans in history, and attributed the attacks specifically to the white-tipped shark, while tiger sharks may also have torn apart some of the increasingly desperate sailors. But why did it take the Naval Command so long to find the wreckage? Believe it or not, though the respective headquarters of the commanders on Guam and Leyte kept plotting boards to track the positions of all vessels, they both just assumed that a ship as large as the Indianapolis would reach its destination on time. The Titanic, anyone? Positions were therefore based on predictions rather than reports, and on July 31st, when she should have arrived at Leyte, Indianapolis was removed from the board in the headquarters of the commander of Marianas. Shortly thereafter, she was also recorded as having arrived at Leyte by the headquarters of the commander Philippine Sea Frontier. Even Lieutenant Stuart B. Gibson, the operations officer responsible for tracking the movements of the Indianapolis from Guam, failed to investigate the sinking and made no immediate report of the fact to his superiors, though he knew of the wreckage at once. For this egregious oversight, Gibson and his counterparts in the Philippine Sea Frontier received letters of reprimand from their higher-ups. In their first official statement, the Navy said the distress calls were transmitted, but that no evidence had yet developed that warranted a second thought. Declassified records later revealed that at least 3 stations received the signals, but none acted upon the call, as one commander was drunk, another forbade his men not to disturb his beauty sleep, and a third thought the whole thing was a Japanese hoax. Captain Charles B. McVeigh III, who had command of the Indianapolis since November 1944, throughout several of the mentioned battles, was one of the last to abandon ship, but was court-martialed in November 1945. He was charged with failing to order his men to abandon ship, and we're being serious here, hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. Okay. Luckily for him, there was no evidence that the Navy itself had placed the ship in harm's way by not informing him that a Japanese submarine was operating in the vicinity of the route from Guam to Leyte. Furthermore, the commanding officer of the enemy sub in question even testified that zigzagging would have made no difference. They had no choice but to remit McVeigh's sentence and restore him to active duty. McVeigh retired in 1949, having achieved the rank of Rear Admiral, and while many of Indianapolis' survivors did not blame him for the sinking, the families of some of the men who died thought otherwise, sending him lovely greeting cards that would sometimes read, "Merry Christmas. Our family's holiday would be a lot merrier if you hadn't killed my son." Missives like this, and the mounting guilt he felt about the whole disaster, caused McVeigh to commit suicide in 1968 at the age of 70. In the summer of 2001, an expedition sought to find the wreckage using side-scan sonar and underwater cameras. 4 Indianapolis survivors accompanied the expedition, which proved unsuccessful. It wasn't until 2016 that new information emerged regarding the possible location of the Indianapolis, when naval records were discovered from a tank landing ship that passed the Indianapolis 11 hours before the torpedo struck. These records showed that the ship was steaming faster and was farther west than previously thought. In fact, she was slightly off the prescribed route. The wreck was finally rediscovered a year after these records came to light at a depth of 5,500 meters, or 18,000 feet. The main part of the cruiser now lies in an enormous impact crater. Her bow, which broke off before the ship sank, was found 2.4 kilometers or 1.5 miles to the east. The 2 forward 8-inch guns, which also broke off on the surface, are also 0.80 kilometers or half a mile east of the main wreck. The bridge, which broke off the ship due to the torpedo explosion, is in a debris field near the forward guns. A single 8-inch gun turret on the stern remains in place, and the gruesome tale of this savage sinking was immortalized in none other than the 1975 movie Jaws, when one of the main characters, Quint, who is a survivor of the Indianapolis, recounted the sinking and grisly shark attacks. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the swift and savage sinking of the USS Indianapolis from History Made Simply. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next episode.